Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to dive on in and take a first look at the initial 3 issues of Gary's Appendix from RPG Ramblings Publishing. Each of these zines with PDF carries an MSRP of $18, or you can just grab each of the PDFs alone over at DriveThruRPG for $8. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera and take a peek at issue 1 of Gary's Appendix. So this is designed for old school essentials, but keep in mind, that means that you can utilize Gary's Appendix for just about any old school Renaissance retro clone of Dungeons and Dragons. So important to keep that in mind. Do want to mention the fine folks over at RPG Ramblings Publishing were kind enough to provide me with these 3 issues, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this coverage with you. These days, it's very important that you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page in these 3 issues, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside Gary's Appendix. All right, so let's take a peek at the back here. So it looks like this is going to give us a breakdown of what is this. Gary's Appendix is a collective effort by a creative menagerie to create a memorable zine for fantasy gamers. This is the first in a series of zines that explores the curious and fascinating parts of our beloved hobby in a way that is thought-provoking and useful. The inspiration for this zine is the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. Gary wrote and collected a vast amount of information, rules, and guidance. Its haphazard nature and perplexing subjects makes it as fresh today as when he penned the work almost 50 years ago. We do not have the audacity to believe that we can produce a work that matches that evergreen classic. We are partakers of the past who seek to share our works, our journey, and our excitement about the hobby. So yes, of course, Gary's Appendix refers to the various different appendices in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It is not Gary's Appendix. It's not Gary Gygax's Appendix. All right, so let's jump on in, take a peek here. So it looks like we have got articles from Jeffrey Jones, Andrew Tryon, Travis Miller, and Zach Goins, with proofreading from Megan Goins. So these are our contributors. And I am not seeing, oh, here we go. Here's some of the artwork. So we've got some credits given to some of the artists here. So we've got our table of contents. Looks like we're going to start off with the bestiary with some new entries and unsettling devotions, chaos and anatomy of fun encounters, wondering about wandering monsters, and the costs of sage advice. All right. So it appears that we're going to get a bestiary that's going to kind of dive on into some of these entries that we would find for old school essentials and give us a bit more content. So here we've got the acolytes. Interesting, we're seeing Thaco to hit armor class 0, which actually, if I remember correctly, that's not in old school essentials. We have ascending and descending armor class, so whichever one you prefer to utilize. So it appears like we're going to get some artwork for each of these. Introduction, appearance, uses, possible scenarios. Very nice. So it looks as if we'll get some information about how to utilize these various different creatures, NPCs, what have you. I love that. Most game masters do not have time to sit there and decode the various different stat blocks. And a lot of times with many fantasy role-playing games, you get kind of the ins and outs of the creature, NPC, what have you, but not how you would utilize them in an encounter. Looks like we've got this usage section here. So as an example, grizzly bear. So we don't get artwork because I think we kind of understand what a bear looks like, so I can see that. So they've got a special bear hug. Usage, judgment. The bear is a manifestation of the forest god who is enacting judgment on those who profane the sacred ways or who damage the forest. A sure bond. A skilled practitioner of shamanic magic can fashion the sinews of an adult grizzly into a cord that is 10 feet long and nearly unbreakable. Then we got resurrection. Legend states that in the winter, if the body of a person recently deceased is placed into the den of a hibernating grizzly, that person resurrects in the spring. Characters' results may vary. So I take that back. It looks like we're not getting tactics, but we are getting some interesting tidbits on how you might use that creature in an adventure. And it looks as if, how would you use it to be a little bit different? So we've got the black pudding. And then we get into unsettling devotions. So it appears we've got a new deity, Seekers of Nagalog, League of the Heptagon, Chaos, an anatomy of fun encounters. What is the anatomy of a fun encounter? This, of course, is a question with a very wide range of possible answers, none of which are necessarily wrong. But one approach is to find ways to introduce multiple moving parts into the encounter. Each new element introduced into an encounter adds a layer of chaos that elevates what would normally be a generic whack 'em till they're dead scenario into an all-out brawl where several things could go horribly wrong at any given time. Enemies shoved off cliffs, characters toss furniture around, opposing sides jockey for position on precarious terrain, and more. Interesting. So setting, environmental factors, monster actions, and set toys, then putting it all together. So some random tables for you to put together, some chaotic encounters. It looks like we've got an article about wandering monsters. Looks like that's a few pages in length. The cost of sage advice. The first edition of the Dungeon Master's Guide offered 13 examples for expert hirelings. 10 years later, in the release of second edition, the list had been whittled down to 3, the assassin, the spy, and the sage. And a remark was added that these experts, quote, require special treatment for they can affect the direction and content of an ongoing adventure. Humorously, the book also stated, all the sage does is conduct research and answer questions. So this is going to flesh out sages and give them a bit more importance, it appears. And then we get an open game license to wrap up. Interesting. This looks pretty cool. Looks like I'll have fun reading this. Of course, I'm going to have reviews of these issues in the near future. So here we've got issue 2. I'm not going to read the back on this. So here we've got our credits once again. So writing, we've got Andrew Tryon, Travis Miller, Zach Goins, Jeffrey Jones, Onslaught 6, and Timothy Satley. So we're going to have our bestiary again. And it looks like we've got 8 entries. Then we've got the language tree, gamifying devotion, flip the script, Gary's guidance, and sage mages. All right, so here we go. We get into our bestiary. So we get the brigand. Brigands represent a number of different people who choose violence or the threat of violence to extract money and resources from people and communities. They are an organized group that practices military discipline. It takes a constant flow of money and resources to keep the group fed and morale high. There are a multitude of reasons that a group chooses a path of violence to live out their lives. Such a life comes with physical risks as well as separation from society at large. And then we get a political slant. The bugbear. These large, brutish creatures enjoy inflicting harm and suffering upon others, relishing the sound of screaming victims. Embracing vileness, they smear wet feces on their short brown fur. The smell of scat combined with their own foul-smelling musk imbues the atmosphere about them with a stench of death and decay. Nice. Got our carcass crawler. Centaur. And then we move into our first article, which is the language tree. Do you find it difficult to use language in your fantasy games? Is the way we've done things for 50 years fundamentally broken? It's neither realistic nor useful for gameplay. Languages are often binary. Either you know them or you don't, and there's nothing you can do about it. Using a simple tool I call the language tree, we'll propose a new way to relate languages to each other and expand their use at the table. Nice. Gamifying devotion. Clerics, paladins, and monks are characterized by devotion to ideals. Typically, these ideals are broadly defined by alignment, but a more granular approach can flesh out your game's world and give your players more ways to engage with the fiction you create at the table. This is where monastic orders come in. Then we have flip the script. I was going to say it's got to do with money. So paper money. Gary's Guidance. One of the most important books in gaming history is the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. Many of us who have been around for a while have discussed the DMG as a book full of genius and contradiction. It has brilliance and it has quirks. The primary purpose of the DMG was to convince dungeon masters to run their games in the style Gary thought was the best. So in this essay, you get an overview of what Gary thought dungeon masters needed to know, how he presented that information, and the author's thoughts about why those ideas are still relevant. Then we got Sage Mages. So more info about sages, this time magic using sages. And then classic dungeon scene, the Keep on the Borderlands. And then wrap up with the open game license. And then we've got issue 3, which I don't know if you can buy this just yet, the physical book, the physical zine, I guess I should say. But I do know the PDF is out. Well, mentioning that, recently issue 4 successfully kickstarted. And I know that the fine folks over at RPG Ramblings Publishing are currently accepting articles for issue 5. So let's take a look into issue 3. So here we have Dave Seamark, Jason Hobbs. So we've got some folks who had not contributed previously. Travis Miller, Zach Goins, Jeffrey Jones, and Onslaught 6 once again. So we've got our bestiary, once again, 8 entries. We've got a brief history of death. That's kind of interesting. The Hodog, Legend of the Supernatural, Part 1, Raised Dead, Salt and Garlic, and Drager Undead Vikings. All right. So we start off with the Ifriti, or Ifrits, as I've heard other people call them. So we get the lore, plot hooks. I see we're gradually seeing a bit of a change in the bestiary entries. Stat block stuff's all still the same. All very similar to what we saw previously. But we are starting to see things like plot hooks. As opposed to calling it usage, we're seeing plot hooks. I really like the artwork that we're seeing with these bestiary entries as well. Really have that old school vibe to them. They would certainly not have been out of place in a Dungeons and Dragons or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons release. So, a brief history of death. Celebrating the end. Must not all things at the last be swallowed up in death? Plato was right, obviously. All things are swallowed up in death, but not just for the poor soul who has breathed their last. All things include those folks left behind by the deceased. In fact, probably even more so than for those who have recently shuffled off the mortal coil. The living have always been left behind to deal with the deceased, to make sure the dead are happy and, well, stay dead, so they can enjoy all the benefits a long and prosperous afterlife may bring. And there's more to that than you can imagine. So, some discussion of the corpse in different cultures as well as ceremonies. Then we've got the Hodug. So this is a new creature. So this is not from the bestiary. Is this a location that we're getting here? No, Legends of the Supernatural, Part 1. Then we got Raised Dead. What is the purpose of death in fantasy tabletop role-playing games? Often, it sets tone. If player characters can die easily, as in almost all TSR-era versions of Dungeons & Dragons, then life is cheap and death is swift and quick. The player characters are not special. Even if they are the protagonists, they are not heroes. Their success, their continued survival is not guaranteed. Not everyone is into this for every genre of game, even within the same system. Some want their characters to be heroes, which translates to them wanting their character to never die. Some even posit character death is a failure on the referee to balance encounters properly. Boo. Don't be tossing that failure on the game master. Why, I oughta. However, I think those players overlook a key component of the worlds we are by default playing in: resurrection. Looks like got some info about that. So then we have salt and garlic, recipes for countering the undead. So I see our theme in this issue is death and undeath, because now we wrap up with some undead Vikings. So we get stat blocks for that as well. So we actually have 2 new creatures plus the bestiary entries in this issue. Then we're going to wrap up with the open game license. Yes, there we go. So that is issue number 3. So number 3, number 2, and number 1 of Gary's Appendix. Very nice. Let's swing on over to the other camera. Of course, I should mention I will be reviewing these issues. I think I'll do it as one review because they clock in at about 40 pages or so. So I will be reviewing Gary's Appendix issues 1 through 3 in the near future, so don't miss out. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as these first looks, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central, as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you're not going to find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, here's hoping all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.